What if I told you that the word salary comes from ancient Roman soldiers being paid in salt? Or that quarantine has nothing to do with the number 4, but everything to do with a deadly plague? And wait until you hear why we call it gossip. It's going to blow your mind. I'm about to reveal the shocking hidden histories behind words you use every single day. And trust me, you'll never look at language the same way again. Welcome back to The Curious Root, where we uncover the fascinating stories hiding in plain sight. Today, we're diving deep into etymology, and I guarantee you will learn something that will make you the most interesting person at your next dinner party. So grab your favorite drink, and let's explore the wild backstories of everyday words that will completely change how you think about language. Let's start with a word that's probably on your mind right now: salary. Every month, you eagerly await your salary. But did you know this word has roots that go back over 2,000 years? The Latin word salarium literally meant salt money. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt or given money specifically to buy salt. Why? Because salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was liquid gold. Before refrigeration, salt was the only way to preserve meat and fish. It was so valuable that Roman soldiers would literally fight wars over salt mines. The phrase, "worth his salt," comes from this exact tradition. So next time you complain about your salary, remember, at least you're not being paid in seasoning. Now, let's talk about a word that became way too familiar during recent years: quarantine. Most people assume it has something to do with the number 4, and they're absolutely right, but not in the way you'd expect. The word comes from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days. During the 14th century, when the Black Death was ravaging Europe and killing 1/3 of the population, Venice implemented a brilliant but brutal policy. Any ship arriving from infected ports had to anchor offshore for exactly 40 days before anyone could disembark. 40 days was chosen because medieval physicians believed it was long enough for any disease to either kill the infected or run its course. The really fascinating part? This 40-day period wasn't random. It was deeply rooted in religious tradition. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai. Jesus fasted for 40 days in the desert, and Noah's flood lasted 40 days. Medieval people believed 40 was a number of purification and transformation. So quarantine wasn't just medical, it was spiritual. Here's a word that will completely change how you view casual conversation: gossip. Today, we think of gossip as idle chatter, but its original meaning was beautiful and sacred. In Old English, a godsib was a godparent, someone who had a spiritual relationship with a child and their family. God meant divine, and sib meant relative or kinship. These godparents would naturally gather during baptisms and family events, sharing news about their extended spiritual family. Over centuries, this transformed into gossip, but initially, it referred to the close female friends who would attend a woman during childbirth. These women would share intimate knowledge and community updates. It was considered a sacred feminine tradition of knowledge sharing and social bonding. Only much later did gossip take on negative connotations when male-dominated society began viewing women's communication networks as frivolous. So when someone accuses you of gossiping, you can proudly say you're continuing an ancient tradition of community building. Let's explore a word that sounds ordinary but has an extraordinary past: nightmare. You might think it's just night plus mare, like a female horse, but you'd be wrong about the horse part. A mare in this context comes from an Old English word meaning demon or evil spirit. Our ancestors believed that bad dreams were caused by evil spirits, specifically female demons called mares, who would sit on sleeping people's chests, causing bad dreams and breathing difficulties. This belief was so widespread that nearly every culture had a version of it. In Germany, they called it Albtraum, literally elf dream. Even today, many people who experience sleep paralysis report feeling like something is sitting on their chest. Our ancestors were actually describing a real medical condition, but they explained it through supernatural means. The word nightmare is literally a fossilized belief in sleep demons. Now here's a word that will make you think differently about innocence. Silly. Believe it or not, silly originally meant blessed or innocent in Old English. It came from selig, meaning blessed by God, or spiritually pure. A silly person was someone who was so good-hearted and trusting that they seemed almost saintly. Over time, this innocence was perceived as naivety, then as foolishness, and eventually as stupidity. It's actually quite sad. We took a word that meant blessed with divine innocence and turned it into an insult. Let's dive into a word that connects us to medieval class warfare. Villain. Today, a villain is an evil character in movies, but originally, a villain was simply someone who lived in a villa, a country estate or farm. These were peasants and rural workers who weren't part of the noble class. City-dwelling aristocrats looked down on these rural people, considering them crude and morally inferior simply because they worked with their hands. Over centuries, this class prejudice became encoded in language. Villain shifted from meaning country person to low-class person to immoral person to finally evil person. Every time we use the word villain, we're unconsciously perpetuating medieval classism. Here's a word that will change how you think about bar trivia: trivia. We use it to mean unimportant facts, but it has a surprisingly poetic origin. In ancient Rome, trivium referred to the intersection of three roads. This was where people would naturally gather and exchange news while traveling. The topics discussed at these crossroads aren't usually matters of great importance, just everyday updates and community gossip. So, trivia originally meant things discussed where three roads meet, basically, casual conversation topics. The Romans understood this as the social glue that held communities together. Today's trivia nights are actually continuing an ancient Roman tradition of community bonding through shared knowledge. Let's talk about a word that reveals ancient medical beliefs: melancholy. This comes from ancient Greek melancholia, literally meaning black bile. According to ancient medical theory, the human body contained four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. An excess of black bile caused melancholy, what we might now call depression. While their medical understanding was wrong, the Greeks were remarkably sophisticated in recognizing that mental states had physical components. Here's a word that connects us to medieval punishment: mortgage. This might be the most ominous word in modern finance, and for good reason. It comes from Old French mort, meaning death, and gage, meaning pledge. A mortgage was literally a death pledge, an agreement that would either be satisfied by payment or would die when the borrower died without paying. Medieval people understood that taking on debt was a life-or-death commitment. Modern homebuyers are making the same death pledge their ancestors made. Let's explore a word that reveals ancient beliefs about death: cemetery. This comes from the Greek koimeterion, meaning sleeping place. Early Christians didn't see death as an ending, but as temporary sleep before resurrection. They refused to use the pagan word necropolis because it implied permanent death. Instead, they chose a word that emphasized their belief in eventual awakening. Every cemetery is a landscape designed around ancient Christian beliefs about death being merely a long nap. Here's a word that connects us to Roman politics: candidate. This comes from candidatus, meaning clothed in white. Roman politicians would literally wear bright white togas when campaigning for office. The white clothing symbolized purity and moral cleanliness, qualities voters wanted in their leaders. The irony is that keeping a toga perfectly white required expensive cleaning. Only wealthy people could afford to be candidates. From the very beginning, the word encoded the idea that only the rich could run for office. Finally, let's end with a word that captures our journey today: explore. It comes from Latin explorare, meaning to cry out. Roman scouts would literally shout into unknown territories to announce their presence, scare away animals, and hear if anything shouted back. Exploration began with making noise in silence, calling out into the unknown and listening for responses. That's exactly what we've been doing today, calling out into the silence of forgotten history and listening for echoes that come back through language. Every word we use is a message from the past, a fossilized thought from people who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago. When we speak, we're channeling the voices of countless generations who shaped these words through their daily lives, struggles, and dreams. The next time you receive your salary, remember the Roman soldiers fighting over salt. When you hear gossip, think about the sacred sisterhood of women sharing wisdom. When someone calls you silly, know that you're being called blessed. Language isn't just communication, it's archaeology. Every conversation is an excavation of human history. Thanks for joining me on the Curious Route today. If this journey through hidden word origins fascinated you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment telling me which word origin surprised you most, and suggest other everyday words whose histories you'd like me to investigate. There are thousands more stories hiding in plain sight, just waiting for us to discover them together. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember, the most extraordinary adventures often begin with the most ordinary things. The words you speak every day are portals to incredible human stories.